Hey guys, it's Sarah, and today's video is going to be about 10 beauty products that I have pretty much stopped buying. I feel like I've evolved quite a bit, so much over the last couple of years, but really I've just learned more about what my personal makeup style is. I used to feel like I had to have what everybody else had, or I had to have every shade of lipstick, like every possible shade of the rainbow, every possible eyeshadow color under the sun. I was supposed to have all of that because I guess I thought every shade was supposed to work for me, and I've kind of learned that there are a lot of types of beauty products and shades of products that I don't need to force myself to like just because it works for everybody else, or just because I am inspired by really bright rainbow eye looks. I know myself better now. I know what kinds of shades I really like. So these are 10 types of makeup products I've decided that I'm just, at least for the time being, I don't really need to buy any of these things, just because I've kind of settled into a good routine. I know what I like. I have products that I like, and I don't need to try to make every type of product work for me. So I was definitely inspired to film this by a few of my favorite YouTubers. I know that I've seen Jessica Braun, Kelly Gooch, and Andrea Mattiano film this type of video recently. I've also done a few myself like this in the past, and I felt like it was time for an updated version because really, especially in 2020, I have gotten to know myself so much better. Like I know my makeup style. My makeup style has kind of changed a little bit. Not a ton, but I know it works for me much better now than I ever did in the past. So I'm really excited to share what I'm no longer buying. Let's go ahead and get into it. So the first item that I am no longer buying is face palettes. And if you watched my last declutter, you kind of heard me share some of my thoughts on face palettes. But the issue for me is, as somebody who likes to keep a pretty curated collection, anytime something comes into my collection, I feel like I'm responsible for using that thing up all the way. And with face palettes, for example, I had a face palette from e.l.f. that had 2 blushes, a bronzer, and a highlight. And I go through bronzers and highlighters a lot more easily than I do blushes. They still take a while to go through, but the problem for me was I completely used up the highlighter in that palette, and then a few months later I completely used up the bronzer, and then I was left with 2 blushes that I was nowhere near hitting pan on. And I really liked having that face palette for travel when I had all 4 shades, because I had basically everything I needed for cheek products all in one place. But once I used up the bronzer and the highlighter, I was just left with 2 blushes and then 2 empty pans that were taking up space. And I also know that I'm just not the type of person that's gonna repress other products into a face palette. For whatever reason, I just don't really like doing that, and the way that my organization system works in my collection, I like to just have individual cheek products. And I realized that when I'm traveling, having 3 individual cheek products really doesn't take up that much more space than a face palette does, especially if I'm picking ones that are kind of compact. That is kind of the lesson I learned there, is that I enjoyed having that face palette in my collection when I had all 4 of the shades, but once I panned a couple of them, it was kind of pointless to keep it around. And even things like blush palettes, highlighter palettes, contour palettes, anything like that, usually there's, a couple shades that maybe don't even really work for my skin tone anyway, and I'm just much better off with single blushes, single bronzers, single highlighters that I know I'm gonna use. I think the only exception for me would be like face duos. Like I recently picked up a couple of the e.l.f. bite-sized face duos, and those, I think, since they're so small and compact and it's only 2 pans instead of like 4 plus different shades, it's a little more manageable for me. I think I could realistically, if I ever do use them up, some blushes I know I'm never going to use up anyway, but that's a little more manageable for me. But anything like 3 or more pans in a face palette, it's just not practical for me. So I'm glad I learned that lesson. Second one that I really don't buy anymore is large eyeshadow palettes. And I'm talking about palettes like 15 plus pans. I feel like 15, 16 pan palettes is about my limit. And lately I'm even liking even more curated palettes. Like for example, this new Profusion Mauves palette, it's just 10 pans. I still feel like you get a lot of variety with 10 shadows, but it's just a little more curated than some of the larger palettes. I know Profusion does make some much bigger palettes that they look beautiful. I've heard wonderful things about them, but I just don't think that I'll buy them because as tempted as I am, I know that I won't, I just feel too overwhelmed with really large palettes. I feel like I just don't even know where to start. There's too many shades. It takes up too much space in my makeup drawers. It's not something I'd ever want to travel with. I'm even loving my, quads right now too. Quads, smaller palettes. My 10 pan palettes are really where it's at for me right now. 12 pans is pretty good too. I have some Anastasia palettes that have, I think, 14 shades. So anything larger than that, I don't even give a second thought. Even if I like the color story, usually it seems like there's at least some overlapping shades in larger palettes, so I'm just not really interested in those anymore. I remember I used to have a really big e.l.f. palette like way back in the day, before I was even close to being on YouTube. I liked it at the time, but looking back, that's just not something that would really suit my preferences and my needs now. Another thing that I've kind of stopped buying is magnetic singles. I haven't bought any new magnetic single shadows in probably at least a year at this point. I feel like 2018 was like the year of single shadows. I really liked the ColourPop ones. I had some Makeup Geek ones. I really liked kind of building my single shadow collection, and lately I just haven't been as into them. I don't find myself reaching for my singles as much as I used to, and I will say I do feel like singles can be very helpful, especially when it comes to kind of supplementing your collection, especially if you have a lot of palettes already and maybe there are just a few colors that you're missing in your collection that you really want. It can be a good way to supplement your collection without buying, more huge palettes. So I think they can be good. I just haven't really been in the mood for magnetic singles lately. I don't know what it is. And it's funny because I remember a year or two ago saying that I hardly ever used my non-magnetic single shadows that are in their own individual packaging. I remember saying like I would never buy those again. I hardly ever reach for them. I always forget about them. I neglect them. I leave them, they just collect dust in my drawers. And now I actually am so into just like single one and done shadows that are not in a Z palette. Like I like having just one really pretty like metallic or shimmery shadow that I can just create a one shadow look with. I'm really into that these days, a lot more than I was the opposite way a year ago. So it's just funny how preferences change. I'm sure at some point in the future I'll get back into magnetic singles, but lately I like my nice curated palettes and I like my little one and done single shadows, cream shadows, but not so much magnetic singles. Okay, another thing I've learned to just stop buying, is pore filling and kind of smoothing or blurring primers. They never do anything for me. They really don't. Let me show you. I love the idea of these because like everybody else, I do have pores and I do have texture, and I love a product that will promise to completely smooth out my skin. Like I have this Jordana Prime No Pores primer, and then I have the NYX Angel Veil, which is supposed to be sort of blurring, skin perfecting. I don't really know what this is supposed to do. Neither of these really does anything for me. I have found that, okay, I have pores, they're not going anywhere, like we all have pores, right? I have found that a really nice hydrating primer does way more for just creating a smooth canvas and really prepping my skin for makeup than any kind of silicone-y blurring primer. I'm better off when I just embrace my pores and my texture and give my skin nice hydrating products that are way less likely to accentuate those things than trying to cover up or undo my pores and texture. So I really like the Ulta Hydrating Face Primer, the Supergoop Glow Screen, that CoverGirl Glowy Primer that I had in my Project Pan. Those all like really kind of smooth out my skin by hydrating it rather than sort of going over it with like a silicone-y film. I just think that does way more favors for my skin than anything else. So any kind of, I think that I'm gonna stop being tempted by smoothing, blurring, pore filling primers because they never really do anything for me. Like my pores are still there and I just feel like they make my skin look a little bit dry and just it's not worth it. Kind of along those same lines, anything mattifying, I don't need it. I don't need anything mattifying. I just like to embrace my skin's natural glow, and if my skin is a little bit shiny, I'm okay with that because I have kind of normal to dry skin. Whenever I put anything mattifying on my skin, especially like setting powders that are meant to be mattifying, they just don't look right on my skin. I'm much better off with sort of glowy setting powders, luminous setting powders, anything like that. It just looks so much more natural on my skin. All right, the next thing, I think this is number 6, I have stopped buying brow pencils completely. In like December of last year, I invested in the Anastasia Dip Brow Pomade, and I have not had to buy a single brow product since. I remember last year, if you watched my channel last year, in my end of the year makeup empties, I think I had gone through like 6 or 7 brow pencils throughout the year. And I just could not believe the amount of waste that that created, and also the amount of money that I spent. They were all drugstore brow pencils, but that really adds up. This pomade was, I think, $21, and it's lasted me 9 months. And there is still so much product left. It hasn't started to dry out. I have the shade Taupe, which matches my brows perfectly. I know there are also drugstore options, but honestly I feel like for me, having found the perfect shade and a formula that I really like, it's probably going to be more sustainable for me to just stick to this one because I know it works for me. Whereas if I buy, I might end up trying out like 4 or 5 different drugstore ones before I find one that really works. So I feel like this is way more cost effective than all those drugstore brow pencils that I went through last year. And I love brow pencils, but I actually feel like I've gotten better at filling in my brows since I started using a pomade. There was a little bit of a learning curve with it. It did take some getting used to, but now that I'm used to it, I can't even see myself going back to a brow pencil. I think it works great. Another thing I've realized that I just don't need in my life is like long-lasting setting sprays. Setting sprays like the Urban Decay All-Nighter, things like that that are meant to help with the staying power of your makeup. Staying power just isn't really a thing that I struggle with anything. Even in the summer when it's really hot or I'm sweating, I'd rather just let my makeup kind of wear off naturally and still look like skin than to have my makeup like fading off in a patchy way. Yeah, I just don't really feel like I need long-lasting setting sprays. I will, I'll usually set my makeup with a little bit of powder, but the setting sprays that I like are really more like finishing sprays, like the Pixie Glow Mist, the e.l.f. Dewy Setting Mist, things that are just meant to kind of finish off your makeup look and remove the look of powder. Not so much for keeping your makeup lasting all day. It's just not really an issue that I struggle with. And I just don't really need that. I feel like, it's great that those products work for other people, but that doesn't mean that I also have to use that just because that's what most other people use, So this is really just kind of a good way to just stop feeling like you have to do your makeup the exact same way that everybody else does, like everybody's different, everybody has different concerns, different skin types, so you don't have to own all the same products that everybody else does. If you never set your face with powder, don't own powder, or if you don't wear foundation, you only really like skin tints or tinted moisturizers, no need to own a full coverage foundation just because you see YouTubers that have a lot of full coverage foundations in their collection. Another thing that I have really started to figure out is cheek products that actually work for my skin tone. So I have stopped buying anything that might be too dark for my skin. Too dark blushes, bronzers that are too dark. I don't need any of that in my life. I used to think that, this is such a fun, bright color, even though it's a little dark for my skin, I can just use a light hand and make it work. But no, I'm better off finding, let's take for example, orange blush, right? I could own a bright orange blush, but I would have to use the lightest hand, and the effect that I would get would not be any different from this pastel orange blush that I have from e.l.f. I guess it's more of a pastel peach, the shade Cantaloupe. I'm loving this. This is actually a wearable orange for me. So, you know, I don't need to have like a hot pink blush or a really deep reddish berry blush. Those just aren't meant for my skin tone, and that's okay. I'm much better off finding a lighter version of that color that's gonna be much more flattering on my skin tone. So that goes for blushes, also bronzers. I've learned that I'm very particular about bronzers. I really just prefer cooler or more neutral toned bronzers. Anything too orange, I just don't want any part of that. Like the Physicians Formula Butter Bronzer, it looks great on some people. There was something about that undertone that just pulled too yellowy orange on my skin, and it just didn't work for me. So really understanding my undertones and what kind of shades of cheek products are actually flattering on me has been a huge game changer. And now I don't feel like I have to have every possible color of blush and every possible color and shade of bronzer. Like some things just work better for me and some things don't, and that's okay. And then another kind of shade thing that I have stopped holding on to is the need to have every shade of lipstick. Like I have learned, especially, okay, I used to think that brownish pink nude lipsticks, like I had to have like 10 shades of those. Or any kind of brown lipstick. Brown lipstick just looks odd on my skin tone. Like it ages me. Like that Bite lipstick in Chai, I was trying so hard to make that work for me, and I finally realized this just doesn't look good on me. Like I don't need to keep forcing myself to wear this just because it looks good on other people. I ended up giving it to my friend Sharon, who has a deeper skin tone than me. It looks beautiful on her. Like that shade was meant for her. Why was I trying to make myself wear something? For some reason, that shade and that type of shade, it makes me look 40 years old. It makes me look so much older than I actually am. And I don't need to, like, why waste my time with shades that I don't even like? Any kind of brown, mid-toned, brownish, pinkish nudes just aren't for me. Like I'm better off with lighter nudes, lighter pinky peachy nudes. Those are way more flattering on me. So I know my lipstick preferences. I love red lipsticks, I love bold, bright lipsticks, and I love light nude lipsticks. I'm learning a lot about what really does work for me, and I don't need to waste my time trying to own every possible color of the rainbow of lipstick and eyeshadow and blush anymore, because certain shades just aren't for everyone. And then the last thing I really don't buy is limited edition products. Anytime something is limited edition, I pretty much just don't buy it. Like that new e.l.f. Retro Paradise collection looked gorgeous. If that palette had been permanent, I probably would have bought it. Well, maybe, I don't know. There would have been a higher likelihood that I would have bought it, but all I had to do was say, oh, is it limited edition? Yes, okay, not buying it. Like easy, simple algorithm. I don't need it. And the reason for that, I really think, is because I have a channel. It's just, whenever I do purchase makeup, I kind of look at it as a little bit of an investment for my channel. Is it something that I'm going to be able to recommend for years to come? That feels like a better investment to me than a palette that's only going to be out for a month, and after that nobody's going to be able to get their hands on it. And I think Andrea was saying this in her video. The point of limited edition is actually really to get people excited to buy that product because it's only going to be out for a limited time. But for me, it has the exact opposite effect. Like as soon as I see that something's limited edition, it's a hard pass. I just don't want it. It also, to me, it just feels like a cheap way for brands to sell products quickly. I would much rather see brands be more intentional with their releases and come out with products that are going to really stand the test of time, that aren't just trendy and exciting in the moment. But brands that seem to really put a lot more thought into their products are ones that I feel like are not always pushing out limited edition collections. And I love e.l.f., don't get me wrong, but their limited edition collections just don't appeal to me the same way that their permanent products do. Those are the 10 things I no longer buy, and I wanted to put this video out there because it's a good reminder that you don't have to make every type of product work for you. Just because every YouTuber uses it, or it seems like that's just the way to do makeup. There are no rules to makeup. You don't have to like the same things that everybody else likes, or you know, you don't have to like the same shades. on your skin tone that look good on somebody else with a different skin tone. And I think a lot of the way that I learned this about myself is just by trying out products, like trial and error. Like I bought products that didn't end up working for me, and I learned that way. I learned my lesson, and now I know not to buy that type of thing in the future. So definitely not to say that I'll never purchase any of these things ever again. Like, you know, maybe 2 years down the road I'll be super into blurring primers or face palettes or who knows, but at least for now, this is kind of where I am with my makeup style. And I feel like I'm just really enjoying makeup a lot more lately than I have ever in the past. So I think that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up so that I know you liked it, and subscribe to my channel. I upload every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday. So I'd love to see you again soon, and I will talk to you next time.